Basically, one of the things that the United States or Yankee government did basically was pretty much take over the Vatican at some point in time. They basically, I don't know if they attacked the Vatican or if they just took it over or how exactly they wormed their way in there, but they did. So anyway, it doesn't really matter, but basically Jimmy Carter pretty much was running the Vatican like his own little private shop. And then you find JFK or Nixon inside the White House and running DC as much as they can. So anyway, and putting as many people as they can in positions of power like the FBI, CIA, stuff like that, basically. And pretty much like I said, most of it's just clones. Like I said, if you lined up all the JFK people, all the people that are except for Nixon, you would find that they all look the same. In fact, there's one picture with 3 of them standing together, and they all look almost exactly the same. And there's actually 30 more of them, or 29 more people. Nixon basically cloned himself 30 times, basically. He basically chained like a whole bunch of women, a whole bunch of nurses down to the floor and basically had them birthing out babies until he had about 30 of himself running around basically in childlike or young teenage form. They birthed about one every 2 or 3 years, pretty much. So, like I said, what you have is about 150 years or about 80 years where people actually think that JFK Nixon is, well, not, he didn't look like Nixon. Nixon was this other guy, and that's after he gets the facelift in Germany and a different nose. And he also fixed his voice. And like I say, if you notice, he only always talks like this in this even tone. Because he loses, when you mess around with the vocal cords, like I say, you lose voice modulation. You can no longer sing. You will always just sound plain and kind of low. Because what they do is they just eliminate voice cords until you have a deeper voice. So you lose all your singing ability, basically. You can't even yell. You can't even go, arr, arr. You can't even yell. So anyway, it's a side effect. And if you look at the medical logs, you'll see. Like I said, Nixon and Jimmy Carter basically killed everybody at the Germany hospital. And this is the same Germany hospital, by the way, that somebody, I believe JFK or somebody, was actually basically sedated for over 2 months at that same hospital. And I think it was the Japanese or Chinese running it. And eventually they go back and they kill everyone. And also have his face work done. It's just some puffier cheeks and some other stuff. And basically then Nixon spends the next 10 years basically pretending to be a Secret Service man. So, which he's not. But if you look at the pictures, he's always the one carrying the nuclear briefcase. But it doesn't really work until both the CIA, FBI, and Pentagon all agree on a state of emergency. So he just didn't know it because, like I say, he didn't actually build the NORAD system. That was actually had been built by the Germans. And so only the Germans knew that all 3 organizations had to all agree on DEFCON 2 before that nuclear briefcase became active. Anyway, this becomes completely and totally evident sometime around 1940 or 1950 when Nixon finally pushes the button on the nuclear briefcase. And nothing happens. So anyway, but up until that point in time, he had thought the nuclear briefcase would fire the missiles. And really all that first nuclear briefcase did really was basically turn on a light in NORAD that said launch the missiles. And then NORAD actually would launch the missiles or something like that. It just switched on a light, basically. That's all it did. We weren't stupid. So anyone can become president or a fake president. But only a few people could slowly work their way up to the top of NORAD through a long military career. And even then, it takes 2 people to actually agree and do it. And even then, the computer still has to agree. So, a very complicated system, and any tampering would fry the whole system, basically. And I mean fry the whole damn thing from NORAD to the missile silos. So you just have a bunch of gooey melted wires, which eventually they did do when they tampered with it. So it basically shunts all the power directly into the wires in the computer system. Turns the whole damn thing into one big fried gooey mess. All of NORAD and all of the missile silos. Which they eventually started messing around. Like I said, it was very much buoy trapped. So if anybody tampered with it at all, you would fry every single wire and every single line through miles of cable and all that other stuff, and lots of computer. It'd fry all the computer banks, everything. Basically put the power directly into all the little small lines. So the whole thing would just and literally melt. And it would take you years to rebuild it, which it did. It took them maybe 5 to 10 years to actually rebuild the system until they could actually get it working again. Anyway, miles and miles and miles of relaying lines and wires. Thousands of wires. Anyway, whatever. I don't really care. Anyway, so that was done sometime around 1970 or 1980. They rewired all of NORAD, or rewired the computer system and updated it with a slightly newer computer or something like that. And that's when you get into the black nuclear briefcase. So, like I said, I designed the whole system. So I knew the system inside out and backwards. JFK and Nixon did not know that the president does not have any control over the death count level. I can lower the death count, or I could lower the death count level when I was younger. Now I can't. But basically, the death count level was set by the FBI, CIA, and NORAD all together. So, anyway, and it had to be in death count level 1 or level 2 for that nuclear briefcase to even work. So, anyway, very much basically just a test for the next psychopath that was going to call himself leader. Like I said, Germany knew that most likely the nuclear missiles would actually be used against them. So, and since they had designed the rockets and the nuclear bombs themselves, well, they designed the computer system too. And the computer system actually sat in NORAD. NORAD actually goes back to like 1920, 1910, some year. I forget. It's really old. It's a lot older than most people think. So is the White House. The White House and the D.C. building are about, at least 200 years old. I'm not exactly sure. They're really, really old. So anyway, and there's some successive pictures of the White House with a cotton farm and a smeltery behind it. So anyway, and of course the mine shaft that used to go underneath it. Like I said, it goes all the way from the harbor, all the way through the White House, all the way up to the Washington D.C. building, and there's one line that goes off to the left and one line that goes off to the right. And it's about 300 feet down, or 3,000 feet down or so. And there's actually a deeper spot in the mine which goes down about 7,000 feet. Anyway, and a whole bunch of rooms and stuff down there. Anyway, it goes for miles. Anyway, there's also likewise one, where is it? Anyway, it goes a long ways, basically, underground, pretty much. And that's because the Washington D.C. building was building motors and stuff. They were using the mine, basically, for the longest time. Anyway, later on, Nixon or somebody has all the miners that worked in the mine killed and shuts down the mine and basically turns it into a jail cell. And basically, eventually they find girls, they see girls going into a big building down by the docks and not coming out. And one or two of those girls actually ends up being dead in a ditch somewhere. And where they were going was actually the White House and the Washington, D.C. building. Or the Washington, D.C. building was one of those places. Probably the White House mostly. Anyway, they would have wild parties in there at night. Anyway, yeah, so, and that's how all the supplies, and that's how Nixon was going from the White House to the Washington, D.C. building and back. And you'd go in there at night and basically spelunk around. It used to be a big library with a whole bunch of books and stuff like that. And then later on it was turned into a courthouse. So, anyway, and before that it was a motor shop and a motor school, a DC motor shop and a DC motor school where people would learn how to build new motors. And before that, it built Civil War guns and some other stuff, and some train engines and some other stuff, and some cannons. Like I said, if you look way, way, way back at the White House, you will see that there's a giant cannon sticking out of the side of it. Back in the Germany days, or back in the 1890s or so, there was a giant cannon inside there. It was originally built. That's what that second subfloor is for. For the cannon to move up and down and fire and stuff. Just like a battleship. It was like a first test cannon. They were messing around with it. So eventually later on they put the top on top of it and stuff like that, I believe. I forget. Different stages. It's happened back in the 1800s or 1700s. The White House is actually like probably about 400 years old, 200 years old, something like that. It's pretty old, actually. Eventually it was bombed and then it was, or shelled, and then it was rebuilt again. Like I said, and also, like I say, about 50 or so Chinese people or Asian people were tortured there, as well as several Germans and also a few Secret Service staff members, basically. And Jimmy Carter or JFK would laugh at people and say, "Do you know what I could do to you?" Once they got people inside there, and it's true. Well, quite a few reporters and quite a few people, including Princess Diana, disappeared inside that house, and then all that. So anyway, and that was basically your G-men, basically of the 1800s, 1900s and stuff. Like I said, JFK actually basically took over the White House from the point in time of 1917. So that's when he actually moved in, or at least the clones started living there. Past that, basically, so pretty much he was basically in there until his death most recently in 1984. And that was the oldest JFK, I believe, or Nixon. Basically JFK with a facelift, like I say. And he was letting the younger kids, his other clones, basically get killed and do stupid stuff, pretty much. And like I said, you would find them